just show up. I think show up as your adult self.
Pollyanna, amazing. Thank you for taking time out of your day. So the topic of the podcast is find your influence. And
Nice topic.
isn't that a great topic? And I love the definition of influence, which is to have an effect or the capacity to have an effect on the behaviour, the character, or the development of someone or something. Isn't that cool? To actually impact someone's development or their character. And in my mind, leadership is about having a positive impact through influence. And I know that, there's leaders out there who don't have that positive impact, but let's not go there because that's obviously a whole nother topic, which is why people like you and I get a lot of work, because there are leaders that need support and need people skills. So, great, thankfully. In saying that, I've read your story and it's simply amazing. Where do you want to start? I want to hand over to you now. Would you like to start at that 21-year-old Pollyanna who went and changed the world and sold IT and created this business that was saleable?
Okay. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you and to be on your podcast today. I think influence is a really worthwhile topic to explore, and there's so many layers and nuances, right? How we influence ourselves. Who are we influenced by, right? I mean, think about the 24/7 news cycle out there, the scrolling that we are all guilty of and pretend we're not. What are we allowing? Are we curating what we're absorbing? And all of that matters to having a positive impact in the world. And then what's driving that intention or that desire for positive impact? I think we have to be really real and honest with ourselves, because that can have unintended consequences. So, I think influence is a beautiful topic.
Beautiful. And thank you. So you talked about intention then, intent. So what's, a leader with, I guess, the right intent has that willingness, that want to see other people grow, which is really important.
Absolutely. And, sometimes that means we have to get out of the way, right? So getting out of the way of ourselves and others so they can grow. And just be really clear on that intention. What does it mean for me to help support and build others and help them grow? But what does that require of me? And I think there's so many places to explore. So 25 plus years of doing this work, right? Prior to building the IT company in London, which we'll talk about later. But unless you're really clear about what you want, who you are, what's important to you, unless you are clear about what triggers you, when you are messy, those times when we just make a god-awful mess and we're not aware we've created that mess. We don't know how to clean it up because maybe we're not even admitting that we've created the mess. All of those foundational pieces around how do you know yourself? Right? How do you know who you are, what's important to you? And then from there, how do I support and influence others? How do I create the scaffolding so that I'm not the support for others? How do I scaffold it so when I'm supporting others, I'm not needed to be there to continue that support? And I think that's a really important piece.
So that influence takes care of itself if you lead by example, if you've got the right intent, and if you lead the way in a way that is really clear on what that other person, I guess, needs and what it is that you need to do to get out of your own way. Can you give us an example of that, Pollyanna? What do you mean by that? Is it like the business owner? You've been a business owner, and is it trying to do everything? Is it saying one thing, hey, you're in charge, I'm going to develop you, but then you do it anyway and you take over and you say, get out of my way, I'm going to do it for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard to let go when you're running your own business. And I think even in leadership, what are all those outdated, unnecessary memes around, if you want a job done, ask a busy person. Oh, yeah, let's just create more overwhelm, right? If you want a job done, do it yourself. It's all of those crazy things that we buy into as a society. What's the other great one I love to poke fun at is I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'm like, you'll be dead sooner, right? So I think it's, I know it's getting clean and clear. Get clean with your intentions, because we can all spruik intentions out into the world, but be honest about your intentions. Be honest about what those yes, be of service to others is a beautiful thing. Also getting absolutely honest and clear around why we're in service, why we support others, what are we getting out of that relationship?
Absolutely.
Because it's a dynamic, right? It's not on its own. It's not a singular. It's not one way. So you really need to do the work. Everyone wants a six-pack, right? Everyone wants a six-pack. Now, buying a yoga mat and some gear, you're not going to get there, right? You have to do the work. And if there's one thing I know, this is layers upon layers, and just when you think you've done the work, something happens, you go, whoa, I've got to go back and do some more work.
Start again.
So it's constant, and leadership and life is a constant adjustment.
The constant adjustment.
I believe it is.
I love that. Can I use that?
Of course you can.
10%?
Yeah. Yours. Have it. My gift.
My gift, being in service.
I'll copyright it later.
Absolutely. Actually, there's a podcast. There's something in that on itself, the constant adjustment to all of the, I guess, the noise, to all of, the social media, the interruptions. We all get interrupted heaps of times during our day, and it's how you refocus and make sure you stay on point and on target, and actually, on intent or on intention.
And it takes recalibration from Anton, because Hayes and I were having a chat and having a coffee before we came in here today. And I was chatting to her about parenting, which parenting and leadership, don't parent your team, by the way, if you're listening to this. We do not want to do that. But what we were discussing was how my partner and I, we've always recalibrated with our kids. And we'll sit down, we'll say to them, we're recalibrating, right? Our youngest is 18, eldest is 21. And throughout the life we go, we're just going to recalibrate, because we're noticing that we're parenting you maybe as a 10-year-old when now you're 14, right? But we'll have that conversation and we'll design the relationship. Yes, we're the parents, so some things are not up for negotiation in those relationships, but some things are. And I think as a leader, and first of all as a human being, recalibrate. Where am I now in life? What does a life well lived look like for me? What do I need to do in order to feel that I'm living a life well lived? Like living it today, not in 10 years' time, not in 5 years' time, today. And you might wonder, what's that got to do with leadership? Everything, like everything.
Absolutely. I agree. I'm with you.
So that recalibration piece is really important. What's important to me as an individual, and then what about the system I'm interacting with? What does the system need? Because sometimes what the system needs, or what the team needs, which is just a system, isn't what I need. But we need to adapt to that. Think about large-scale change projects. Humans, we don't like change.
Oh, that's right.
We talk about liking change, but we don't like change.
That's right.
Why? Because it creates discomfort. Discomfort, well, it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And I don't think anyone ever died from discomfort. So we can sit with discomfort, but as human beings, we are hilarious. We'll do everything we can to numb discomfort. From low-level garden variety stuff, procrastination, distraction, to high-level addiction, addictive behaviours, that whole range of things that we do because we are human. So unless we understand ourselves and understand what those triggers are, when we numb ourselves and how we do that, when we are reactive, when we're going nuclear reaction 7 when a 3 would have been good for the situation. Once we've done that, we can look at the system and say, what does the system need? And how do I bring myself and my leadership to the system's needs? So the system might be, we need to drive a change project, and, you just got to get your discomfort out of the way, not numb it, acknowledge it. It's a human thing. It's human beings. We feel discomfort. And how do we still show up, not just lead, but create leadership throughout that discomfort? Does that make sense? So,
I'm actually doing this podcast for me, just so you know. I'm going to go back and listen to this. I don't usually. Gold, you articulate this stuff so beautifully and so articulately.
I love it. I think it's a huge privilege to do this work.
Oh, agreed. And I talk a lot about parenting and leadership. And I say that parenting is the most important job on planet Earth, closely followed by leadership, because we do get to have an influence on other humans, and parenting more so than leaders. Yeah. But I love how you talk a lot about triggers, and you use the word triggers a lot. So with a psychology background, it's really interesting because usually, so the word trigger is actually used inappropriate a lot of the time. It was designed to be used with PTSD and those really chronic type amygdala type psychology changing events that we have in life. But it's now come to mean what changes your emotional state. But what you've linked it back to, and you talked about that from when you go from zero to, what did you say?
Nuclear 7 or something.
Nuclear. But you also mentioned it just when things change in a system, and what triggers your response or your reactivity to a system change. And I love that. And so you really always, there's this self-management, this self-diagnosis is what I'm hearing, which is where the recalibration comes from, because you can't recalibrate something you haven't diagnosed.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% correct. We use psychological terms out of context. Everyone's a narcissist these days, apparently.
The dark triad.
However, so maybe trigger's not the right word. A better word might be what ignites you, or what creates a reaction in you that we take on board and then create a mess, right? So that's self-management, and self-management is one of the most highly prized skill, I believe, as a human being that we can develop. When I did my coaching training many, many moons ago, they spent a long time on self-management so that we don't lead the client's agenda, that we have the client have the agenda that we support, right? So important, right? Otherwise you're leading the witnesses, which is, important not to do.
And I think a lot of coaching programs, and I haven't done one, so sorry, I apologise to everyone out there, past and present and future, and I probably won't, because I feel like when you are in service and you have the right intent, and when the client writes the script, I've just got to have great questions. And I love what you said then, that, back in the day, and I don't know if you had this experience, Pollyanna, when I first started coaching, no one had come, because it was like very prescriptive, and there was a workbook and there was all that stuff. And now it's very different in coaching, and people just want to come and be heard. And it's really this coaching is this process of what are your actions from the last time we met? I did this, that. What are your goals for this program? What challenge can I help you with today? And when you sort of keep it really simplistic, and those questions are all just focused on the other human.
I think being with the person and holding space for them, which with your psychology background you would absolutely be all over. So you don't need to do a coaching course, right? You've got incredible training and skills behind you. Yeah. I was very fortunate. I trained with an extraordinary company that aren't in Australia. Was when I was living in the UK, and 3 years to get my coaching quals with them. And they have an ontological model, which is a fancy word for, the whole person. And back then it was very different to coaching. It was very action-oriented coaching. And this was a very whole person, whole human coaching. So I was hugely blessed to have found. I researched for 6 months before I handed over my dosh and did a course. I was very fortunate to find, some really world leaders in this space, and there's some extraordinary organisations here now as well. And from that, it builds.
Good on you, Pollyanna. Wow. I love the gratitude. Very fortunate. There's people that come across our lives and our paths, and you talked, and I love, you have a lot of gratitude, it comes through, and you were grateful, and you said thank you to me before we started, so, and thank you, if I haven't yet. Who did influence you? Who's had a big impact on your life? Who are you really most grateful for?
Gosh, so many people. Family members, my grandmother, my heritage is Croatian, And she, Baba, which is grandmother in Croatian, Baba Pava, which is, I think, Paula or Pauline in English. She was just an extraordinary woman who held into her values, and she didn't take any nonsense from anybody. Very strong woman, lived into her 90s.
Wow.
So on a family level, she had a massive influence on me. And I got to meet her as an adult when I went to live in the UK. So I met her first when I was a child, when I was 7, but also going back as an adult on my own, which made a massive difference. Phil Sandoval, as a mentored me sort of, in and out over 10 years, who I met through the coaching community. And I trained in his systems thinkings program. Sadly, he's no longer in the world, and hugely missed. Extraordinary human being, and learnt so much from him. Just learnt so much from him. Look, there's a whole raft of people that I could name check on, but I think I just think we live in an extraordinary time. And going back to your original topic around influence, how we influence, given the extraordinary times we live in. And you mentioned AI, and I was saying, don't ask me about AI. No, nothing. But what I do know is there's still human drivers and humans behind AI and how we develop it, use it. I mean, there's a lot of bias, written into AI. It's not my topic. It's not my area of expertise, right? But that, weaving it back to your topic around influence, how we influence ourselves and how we put that aside so that when we're influencing a system, that we notice our own agenda, our own biases, the things that have us ignite and react, so that we can actually serve the system that we're a part of. And I think that's really important, because often I'll say to my clients, you're really important and what you want matters, except for when it doesn't. Right? Because if you're coming to me as a one-on-one client, then it's all about you, and how you want to live your life, the impact you want to have, the challenges that you want to navigate. If you're coming to me as a team, the team is the client. It's not the individuals. So the team as a living, breathing entity in its own space. So how do we as individuals serve the team's agenda? And what are the influences that enable or derail that? So that is just a fascinating space. And then you move into the stakeholders, the organisation. If you're a member-based organisation, then your members. If you're, whoever those ultimate stakeholders are in, whether it's a board, whether it's shareholders, whether it's community, then there's a broader impact piece on system. So how do we now bring our collective skills, park our own internal agendas and stuff that we need to go manage, and be supported with, which is important. But sometimes we have to go, this doesn't live here. I had a client recently, and there's been themes around this. I don't know if you're noticing this. Distilled down, my leader doesn't understand me.
Yeah.
And my first response is, what expectations are we having of that? Because maybe it's not your leader's job to understand every aspect. In the same way, our romantic partners or our life partners can't be our everything.
That's right.
The pressure on leaders to be everything and the expectation that they will be everything is such a heavy burden, and it really comes out in change. And you would notice this as well.
Absolutely.
So it's I'm loving your thoughts around influence and how we weave that back down.
I love to serve the system, serve the team, serve the stakeholders, but obviously it starts with serve the individual and serve the leader first if that's your client, one-on-one. Unbelievable.
And self-management is know
who you're serving.
Like a camera has many lenses, right? So sometimes I'm going to come to you and I'll be like, well, as my direct leader, I want to talk about my career, what's happening for me, what's important for me, and equal pay day, pay me the same as you're paying the men, right?
That's right.
It might be also that if I'm coming to a team, then I have to park some of that internal stuff. Doesn't mean it's not as important. It's just that now what does the team need to be successful? How do we achieve what the team is there to do together? I think that's I think we can just we are such complex kaleidoscope human beings, and yet we seem to come to a lot of things in one dimension.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. And then obviously we try to put the kaleidoscope perspective on it, and we say, oh, my leader doesn't understand me, and they don't understand the whole me.
Yeah.
And now we've got psychological safety, where leaders have got another burden of responsibility, which is those 14 elements of psychosocial guidelines that, you know, and that's what I'm down here to do in Melbourne, actually, with an accountancy firm tomorrow. And you know, it's hard for leaders. Leaders have got a tough job. And I think that complexity of the human psyche is, you know, for people. We've had people come through our programs and say, Anton, I didn't even know leadership training was a thing. The second most important job on planet Earth, and they didn't know they could go and get trained in it. So they fumble their way through and end up in these leadership roles. And, you know,
I'm so glad they've got you then for this. You know, I think tomorrow have a play and ask them think about what you need individually, but now let's think about what the team needs. And psychological safety isn't a one-person job. Like when I work with a team, we measure the system, right? So there's nowhere to hide. Right? We measure across 14 key capabilities.
Nice.
And we sort of look at the report and well, this is the team as seen by the team and measured. And it's really interesting. We talk about leadership, and there's a component on the diagnostic that talks about leadership, and everyone looks at the leader and going, yeah. We're going, no, leadership in this context is the leadership of the team.
Nice.
We are all a part of the system.
Absolutely.
Like, we're all part of the system.
I love that.
So for one person to be responsible for the psychological safety of a system, I just think that's a little bit bonkers. What's the professional word for bonkers?
Bonkers. I think it is bonkers.
Bonkers.
I'm going to go with
bonkers.
bonkers. I agree.
Bonkers. Everyone has a role to play. How many leaders do we know that have been bullied by team members? How many team members have been bullied by leaders? It's all unacceptable behaviours, right? Yet if we take accountability and responsibility for our intention, how we show up, and then we bring that and we're part of a system, look at what the system needs to be successful, how we shape that system, and do you know what? The rubber hits the road when we go, we are the system. I ran a leadership team for one of the Australian universities here, and the Dean of Leadership was in the room, and it was really funny. Great human. But at the beginning, I could just see him rubbing his hands together going, he's like, first question was, what's your philosophy on leadership? I'm not going head to head with the Dean of Leadership on leadership. Right. You have honour your expertise.
That's right.
And we're not here to do this. We're sort of doing yoga of leadership today. We're putting it into practice. You've got all the theory.
Yoga of leadership.
And the reason we're here today is because some of that theory is not translating into impact outcomes and culture in the organisation, right? So let's work on that. And at the end of the couple of days, it was a beautiful program. At the end of a couple of days, I'm like, okay, I've got my one philosophy for you. And he's like, awesome. I said, show up as your adult self. Just show up. I think show up as your adult self. That's what leadership demands, and that's what life demands. We all have reasons why we lose it. We all toss our toys out the pram at times. That's human. Understanding what ignites that. I'm not going to use triggers.
No.
What ignites that?
I didn't
No. I love that. What ignites that, and managing that, and having coping strategies. It might be go for a walk. Whatever it is, right? Just be silent for 30 seconds and let the emotions pass. Show up as your adult self, because that's what at core and foundational is required.
Whoa. Massive shout out to Pollyanna. We're just ending part 1. And I hope you'll come back and join us for part 2, because Pollyanna, this information that we are lucky enough to get today is absolutely top shelf. Thank you, Pollyanna. Thanks for part 1.
Thank you so much for having me.